Thank you, Monilla. My thanks to Maya and the team as well for inviting me. And hats off to the Teacher Foundation for systematically chipping away at creating change in our schools, something I feel that I don't honestly know of any other organization that does that at a consistent level. So congratulations. I'm going to start with a quote. And this is attributed to a gentleman that we will refer to as Peter. The world is passing through troubled times. The young people of today think of nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They are impatient of all restraint. They talk as if they knew everything. And what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for the girls, they are forward, immodest, and unladylike in speech, behavior, and dress. Okay. The gentleman Peter that we are referring to is Peter the Hermit, and this was from the 11th century. So in spite of what we have about the despairing state of children and of teenagers, our world has survived and it has thrived. I also have the unenviable task of continuing after Rahul. It's still, reeling around in my head, and that was a really searing account of an very individual perspective of what school is like, and asking very, very probing, uncomfortable questions. Right? Happily enough, though, I continue in that strain. And when Maya first mentioned the theme of today's talk, and we're looking at cultural crossroads, I actually had to sit down and introspect on that meaning and what that meant for me. And to actually ask, are schools truly finding themselves at cultural crossroads? Are we truly challenged by these societal shifts that are happening around us? Are we worried about the complexities of these high-speed communication networks and highways that we find our kids on? Are we losing sleep at night worrying that we'd go obsolete, like the telegram or the typewriter? And I wonder if just at the core, we're just a little uncomfortable with behavior that threatens our notions of classroom order, teacher control, and student compliance. I believe to understand what we need to look at in terms of cultural crossroads and change, that we begin to understand children and some amount of classroom pedagogy. So I've kind of split my very, very brief talk into two. The first bit just looks at a theoretical understanding, because one of my pet passions and theoretical interests is also looking at teacher attitudes and belief systems, and how I understand that is the center and the heart of any kind of consistent real change. And the second part of my talk is really looking at adolescent development and understanding how sensitively we need to deal with issues that are around us. To me, schools are complicated places, sometimes messy, but definitely complicated at all times. And culture, just that term, is a loaded, multi-layered, complex construct. So what really does this afternoon's theme want us to explore? In my doctoral research, one of the things that I had to understand was looking at schools and understand cultural context of schools. And I am partial to ecological models, and my favorite being Bronfenbrenner. Goes right back to the 70s, but is very relevant. And he spoke of nested systems, and the fact that an individual or a school is an organism within a changing context. So at its most intimate level, the child's immediate system is school and the family. And this school and family is governed by changes that happen around it. So when we understand the concept of who are the stakeholders in this process of change that we have, or who is going to make us more culturally responsive, it's not just the schools. It's a whole system that exists around a school that influences change at many, many levels. Now, this particular topic that we were looking at was looking at cultural crossroads. And what I'm also fascinated by is the concept of culture in schools, and that each school has its unique culture. So even though we have similarities across schools, each school has its own persona, if you will. So you're able to recognize a teacher or a student and say, that's the culture of this school, or this is the culture of this other school. So the sense of what is a school culture, to me, encompasses perspectives, assumptions, decisions, value systems, all of these frameworks that are shared and give schools a very distinct identity. There is an interesting book, if you get your hands on, called Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal. And they talk about the fact that because our values and assumptions are usually implicit and second nature to us, we act as if the way things are is the way they should be. And this is what makes it hard for us to step back and actually examine what is relevant anymore in what we're doing. Culture surrounds us very much like water surrounds fish. And it's never easy to step back and understand what it is that works, what doesn't, what is relevant, what isn't. But are there schools who are probably doing a better job of it, who are not floundering? Perhaps they are. And what are they characterized by? Critical inquiry, reflective practice. At the heart of any school, respectful, caring relationships, not just between teacher and students, but a high level of collegiality as well. And flexibility. These, I believe, are markers that would indicate schools that are dealing with crises and being flexible and understanding what's happening around them in terms of being more culturally relevant, more proactive in what they're doing. I'm going to stop with looking at understanding and making references to culture, but really beginning to look then at, should we be at crossroads? And I wish we were. Because crossroads to me in a therapy situation is somebody who has journeyed up to a point and who is facing a dilemma, who recognizes that there is possibly a need for change, or who is at the threshold of change. That to me represents a crossroad. And I do sincerely wish that we find ourselves at these crossroads. And why do we need to be at this crossroad right now? In India, children under the age of 16 constitute 40% of our population. According to the Ministry of Human Resource and Development in 2006, we have the largest elementary student population in the world. We also have about close to 24% prevalence rates of children with emotional and behavioral disorders among a children and an adolescent population. So it makes you wonder what we're doing or what we're not doing as parents and as schools that create a healthier country. Schools, like the WHO points out, are critical in building a child's level of self-esteem and a sense of competence. And those are core constructs that go into making successful adults and the kinds of relationships that children go on to have. So what we do in schools, what we do in families is important. I do have parents of different age groups. So in a day, I can deal with a 5-year-old. In my independent practice, I could go home and it would be a 22-year-old's parents who are walking in. And these are parents who have their hearts in the right place, but deeply worried, deeply concerned about things that needed to have happened. So recently I had a couple who came in and went on to describe how their child was in a regular school, but clearly had difficulties with attention. And over the years, from his primary school right down to middle, and now he's in high school, has continued to be shouted at, yelled at in class, told off that he wasn't all right, had his books flung, thrown outside class, punished, called dumb repeatedly by the father, who was also very physically abusive with the child. And they ended their intake session with me with saying, we would like for him to be emotionally set. And I honestly didn't know how to move from that expectation that a few sessions in therapy was supposed to undo 14 years of a child not receiving any kindness, not wanting to feel successful, not wanting or not having received a sense of success in whatever he did. I think when we're looking at the specific concern that came up, which was the suicide of this adolescent, I'd like to believe that they are not mini adults. Their brains are wired differently. And I think we all have a notional understanding of what it is when we talk about adolescence, but I think there is only that much that you can recognize as saying, this is all hormonal, or he or she is behaving like this because there are hormonal changes. And to really understand what is happening in their minds. Another area of research interest is looking at neuroscience and what it brings in. And adolescence is a fascinating time of growth and development in terms of the human brain. So this is like the second wave of brain development that happens. And what begins to happen around the ages 14 to 19 is something called brain pruning, which sounds rather drastic, but it really involves extra neuronal circuits being trimmed in so that your brain is a much more efficient machine. So things that children do or things that adolescents do in this period are also encoded into circuits, and these are also the behavior patterns that they are likely to repeat as adults. And I think that's important to keep in mind because we understand that their brains are a work in progress. So when I have a parent who comes in and says, and now he's 14 years old and he should be able to just do this by himself, I've had so many kids fall by the wayside just with that expectation that if you've somehow magically reached an age of 14 or 15, then you're supposed to enter into this adult world of responsibility, commitment, and all of that, and it doesn't really happen. And as teachers, are we in a place where we accept that, where we understand where they are in terms of developmental progress, and therefore recognize their behavior as being an offshoot of that development? A couple of things that I think we need to keep in mind when we are working with adolescents. One is that there is a concept of being centered around their worldviews. They are beginning to recognize that I can take in other viewpoints, but the sense is that it is me, and that is part of their growth, and that's all right. That's how they learn to understand that besides me, there is a larger context, and therefore I need to understand this. So when you have parents who come in and say, but how can they be so selfish? Is he just thinking of himself or herself? Or did he not see that maybe the sister wanted the last piece of cake? And the answer is no. Their brain is not wired to do that at that point in time. Okay? This is a time where they are seeking, creating an identity, and that is the sole work of the adolescent period. So things that happen in an adolescent's life have profound impacts in terms of who they are as young adults and the way they transition into different phases of their life. This is also a time of experimenting and risk-taking. If you can imagine a car that is being constructed with the accelerator being built first and then the brakes, and that's exactly how the human brain develops. It moves, it develops from the back, from your amygdala or your mid-center towards your prefrontal cortex. So the exciting parts of the brain, the thrill-seeking areas of the brain develop first, and then come the controls and the ordering of certain things around you. So it is a vulnerable period for them. So when we were talking about disciplining and setting certain things in place, what do we need to keep in mind? Do we understand that this is a vulnerable phase? And Rahul has, spoken about a 14-year-old and, looking at drugs, at sex, at consuming alcohol, and that is not far-fetched. I deal with it every day, and yes, I can testify to the fact that it is a reality. The one thing that I've seen over the years in terms of what actually keeps a protective factor or a force going for a child, because there is only that much you can do to save or to protect or keep them safe from harm, is a sense of connect that you have as an adult with that particular child. Staying connected, to me, is the single biggest factor that keeps a child feeling safe, being able to handle risks, and being able to handle the not-so-good parts of their lives as well. So that is something that I would kind of encourage you to look at in your teaching practice, and as parents, the sense that in some way I have to stay connected with what my child is doing, thinking, seeing, is important, is truly important. I also believe that teachers who are genuinely interested in their children, in their students, and who are able to communicate a sense of respect. You may not agree with what a child has to say, and that's okay. But to be able to respect that child for that opinion and to not judge, I believe are core features that actually help a teacher dealing with an adolescent. It's not an easy age group to have to deal with. Those of us who are parents of adolescent kids know how prickly they can get at times and how frustrating some occasions can be. But at the core, if there is a sense of being interested, of being able to listen to what they had to say without a sense of judgment, then you will come through alive through this phase. Thank you.